Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And this one is quite a surprising development from Amnesty International about current war in the world. And it was brought to my attention by an account on Twitter. I think it was on Friday, and I was looking through my Twitter timeline trying to find the person that brought it to my attention so I could properly credit them in this. But I do apologise for not being able to find it. But when I do share it on Twitter later on, I'll try and do so. And what it was, it's a recent statement and claims by Amnesty International, the well-known group who call for humanitarian rights across the world for lots of different things. Now, they made this statement, and just so it'll make sense towards the end of the video why, but I'm going to omit some of the names of the countries taking part just to give it a wee bit more credence, and it'll make sense once I finish. And what it says in the headline is that the fighting tactics endanger civilians. This is the fighting tactics from the defending troops, not those attacking. Okay. Amnesty International commissioned independent external experts to review the production and publication of this press release. Their findings and recommendations can be found in this legal review, blah, blah, blah. Amnesty International welcomes the findings of these reviews and is committed to implementing their recommendations. And then they highlight three of the summary details covered in this piece that they wrote. Military bases set up in residential areas, including schools and hospitals, attacks launched from populated civilian areas, but the violations, they say, do not justify the other side's indiscriminate attacks, which have killed and injured countless civilians. So this conflict, they're saying those attacking and those defending are actually doing things that are wrong, and one doesn't justify the other, basically. So what it says here is the defending forces have put civilians in harm's way by establishing bases and operating weapons systems in populated residential areas, including schools and hospitals, as they repelled the attackers' invasion, an Amnesty International study showed. Such tactics violate international humanitarian law and endanger civilians as they turn civilian objects into military targets. The ensuing attackers' strikes in populated areas have killed civilians and destroyed civilian infrastructure. So what they're saying is because the defenders are setting up camps and firing rockets and stuff from populated areas, schools and hospitals, that's encouraging the attacker to go for those areas, and obviously leads to civilian deaths. We have documented a pattern of defensive forces putting civilians at risk and violating the laws of war when they are operated in populated areas, said Agnes Callamard, the Amnesty International's Secretary General, nonetheless. Being in a defensive position does not exempt you from respecting international humanitarian law. Not every attack documented followed this pattern, however. In other locations, it concluded that they had committed war crimes. That's the attacker, including in some areas of some cities, blah, blah, blah. The organisation inspected strike sites, interviewed survivors, witnesses and relatives of victims of attacks, and carried out remote sensing and weapon analysis. Throughout these investigations, researchers found that the defence forces launching strikes from within populated residential areas, as well as basing themselves in civilian buildings. The organisation's crisis evidence lab has analysed satellite imagery to further corroborate some of these incidents. So they went to some way to identify where these things have happened and used a lot of technology. Most residential areas where soldiers located themselves were kilometres away from the front line. I take it that's the border. Viable alternatives were available that would not endanger civilians. Interesting, isn't it? Survivors of attacker strikes in these areas told Amnesty International researchers that the defending military had been operating near their homes around the time of the strikes, exposing the areas to retaliatory fire from the attacking forces. Amnesty International researchers witnessed such conduct in numerous locations. International humanitarian law requires all parties to a conflict to avoid locating to the maximum extent feasible military objectives within or near densely populated areas. Other obligations to protect civilians from the effects of attack include removing civilians from the vicinity of military objectives and giving effective warning of attacks that may affect civilian population. Now, here's the kicker. I'm not talking about Hamas and Israel here. This report was from the 4th of August 2022, almost 18 months ago, and it is describing atrocities in the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, what I find quite fascinating is, most people, when they heard me reading that report out, because I didn't say the word Ukraine or Russia, would have quite rightly expected that I was actually discussing the current issues in Gaza. Because the type of things that they're highlighting, we all know have happened in Gaza. And there lies the kicker. There lies my question. If Amnesty International and an organisation such highly regarded as Amnesty International can spend so much time and resources and research for what they believe was gone wrong with the Ukrainian defence of their own country, why have they not done similar in Gaza? Because there is not a single item there that I read out of that report that is not happening, and worse, in Gaza, unfortunately, due to the leaders being the terror group Hamas. Now, is it the fact that this is a terror group that allows them to ride roughshod over international humanitarian law? Or is it because of the wokeness of international bodies such as Amnesty International that would not allow them to cast such dispersions against Hamas? That's a question that I ain't answering. That's a question that you should ask yourself. If these things are all illegal when they happen in one war 18 months ago, why are they suddenly not important now? Because I'm quite sure Israel, if they've not already broken some war laws and rules, they're bloody close to it. And the world seem determined to highlight those things. Yet the world, and such bodies like Amnesty International, who should be driving such things, are completely ignoring the humanitarian issues that have been broken on one side of a war and not another. Now let me make my own point perfectly clear. I don't like wars. Unfortunately, they happen. And when they do happen, people die. I would rather they didn't exist. But when they do exist, those not involved in the war have no right to judge one party with a different set of rules to another. And as I've already said, I'm quite sure Israel, if they haven't already committed some war crimes and issues, they might be close to the wind. But it is undeniable that Hamas have committed humanitarian issues with the way they're conducting themselves in this war. I will also reiterate some things I spoke about in an earlier video, where people just shouting that you've committed war crimes doesn't mean you've committed war crimes. It means that someone thinks you've committed a war crime and they probably have absolutely no understanding of what a war crime is. Because we keep getting told that Israel is committing war crimes by turning off power and all that sort of stuff. That's not a war crime. That's actually allowed during the war. It's quite easy to find this information. It's not against the law to turn off the power. But even in saying that, I'm going to reiterate a story that I gave with a previous video. If there's no power in Gaza because the bad Israelis have turned it off, how come any time you see footage from a hospital, from outside the hospital, and then following you in when there's someone lifted, injured apparently, into a hospital situation, outside and inside that hospital is full of people filming it in mobile phones? How's that possible? How can these phones be charged and able to record anything if there's no power in Gaza? And I'm not trying to justify that the Gaza situation is not horrific for the people, the innocent people in Gaza, not Hamas. Don't hold much empathy for them whatsoever. But I'm not suggesting that it's not a horrific situation for those caught inside a war, because wars are bad. But I can't believe everything that's put in front of me. And you have to remember that one of the biggest weapons in any war is a weapon of PR and propaganda and spin. So whatever you see in front of you, you have to decide yourself what you can and cannot accept as gospel. That's all I'll say on the matter. However, Amnesty International managed to collate all this data from lots of sources, and lots of expensive sources by the sounds of things, when they wanted to investigate Ukraine breaking international humanitarian laws. I think they should look at the Middle East right now to see if they can find the same. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, I'd be grateful. There'll be some recommendations in the corner, but most of all, despite all the atrocities round about us, try and have a great day. Cheery bye now.